Hello there! Welcome once more to Kwanchue's Kitchen. And if this is your first time stopping by, I would like to say a very warm akwaba to you. Please join me as we prepare the most delicious goat meat stew with as little oil as possible. Here are the ingredients you are going to need, and everything will be listed in the description box. So I have some curry powder, some dry bay leaves, as well as some star anise, some all-purpose seasoning, ginger, some calabash, nutmeg, anise, and some cilantro seeds or coriander seeds, some tomato paste as well as fresh tomatoes, my goat's meat, some red bell peppers, and red onions. You can use whatever onions you have, of course. I've washed my meat and put in my pot. To that I'm adding my bay leaves as well as my star anise, all-purpose seasoning, curry powder, and some salt. So that is the dry ingredients to marinate the meat. I'm also going to blend some other ingredients to add to it in the form of wet. So I have my ginger. I'm just going to cut it up. And to that I'm going to add one onion that I'm also going to chop. To these I'm going to add 4 cloves of garlic, my anise, calabash, nutmeg, and coriander seeds, and blend. I'm going to pour all this goodness over my meat with all that it has already on it, so you can only imagine how good this meat is going to end up being. No, we are not going to be joking here in terms of our flavor, okay? And I've rinsed out my blender and added that as well. Giving it a stir. I think I need a little bit more liquid, especially knowing how tough this meat is. Obviously not too much water. You don't want this water to cover your meat, because you want the stock or the marinade that your meat is going to cook in to be as thick as possible, so the infusion happens well. Now I'm going to start cooking this, and whilst the meat cooks, I'm going to start focusing on the ingredients that will be for the stew itself. So I'm going to cut up an onion. I'm going to be roasting the vegetables for the stew, so I'm flicking my onions. To that I will be adding my garlic, some basil, and I'll set that aside now and focus on my peppers. So the peppers, I'm going to cut all 3 of them. I'm just going to try to go around the seeds, cut up the actual peppers, and add it to my other ingredients. These red bell peppers are going to enhance the color of our stew, which is so evident in the beautiful red color it has. And also it brings a little bit of sweetness to your stew. It's not going to make it overly sweet, but they normally have a little bit of sweetness to it. So it balances out the acidity of the tomatoes, and your stew is just going to be amazingly delicious. Yes, so if you can find some, definitely add a little bit or try it. If you don't like it, you can omit it, but I like it in here. So I've cut all 3 of them up. I'm adding it in here to the rest of my ingredients that I've already cut up. Since I intend to roast my tomatoes with these other ingredients, I'm going to cut them up and deseed them.
Can you smell the aroma? Yeah. From Kwanchue's Kitchen. Yeah. Delicious, yeah, delicious, delicious, yeah, delicious, 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 yeah, delicious.
Yes, that's a lot of juice around these seeds, and that is why I removed them. So now my tomatoes get a chance to roast faster, and the juice, of course, I'm not going to waste, so I'm straining it. And at this point I'm going to be using it to make something else, not in the stew, but you can definitely make your stew with it. I just wanted this stew to cook as fast as possible. And if you garden, you can throw these seeds into your garden and hopefully they do well. I'm going to pour all my cut up vegetables here into a roasting pan. To that I'll drizzle some oil, so I'm using some avocado oil. I'll also add some black pepper to it. Toss everything together so the oil coats everything. I've preheated my oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. I use a gas oven, and I'll be roasting my vegetables for an hour. Checking on our goat's meat about 40 minutes later, it is doing well. It is very tough. So of course, depending on the toughness of your meat, it might be almost ready to come off the fire, but this needs to cook a lot more. So I'm going to add some water, about a cup of water here. Stir it, cover, and let it cook for an additional 30 minutes. I'm going to be baking this. I'm not going to be frying my goat's meat, yes. And so that's where the healthy part comes in this stew. So I have no rush, because as soon as the tomatoes and other vegetables come out of the oven, my goat's meat is going to go in as well. So it can just sit and simmer down, soften up as much as it needs to, whilst the tomatoes and other vegetables roast in the oven. The vegetables are done roasting, so I'm going to get my meat ready to go in the oven as well. I'm going to spray some cooking spray onto a baking sheet and transfer the meat onto that. I could have used an air fryer, but this is a big batch of stew I'm making, so using the oven is faster for me. Definitely use your air fryer if you're just making a fraction of the stew. As I transfer the meat onto the baking sheet, I'm also fishing out the star anise. Those I'm going to get out of the pot or the meat. It's done with this job. I'm going to also leave the bay leaves in the stock, and that is going to go into the stew, so it continues to do a little bit of infusion. The meat is so lean, I have almost no fat in my stock, so I'm just going to cover and set it aside until I'm ready to use it. Normally, if it has a lot of fat, I'll just pour it into a bowl, freeze it, and by the time the stew is cooked enough for you to put the stock in, you could just lift the fat, which would come on the surface, and then your stew will be healthy. But this is good. So I've brought out my tomatoes, and now I'm going to put my meat in there and let it bake. My vegetables are beautifully roasted. They have a beautiful char to it. Almost all of the basil is well roasted at this point, and it is beautiful now, perfect for me to transfer it into my blender and blend. I'm going to allow it to cool off and start making my stew. So I have some oil in my pot now. To that, I'm going to add my onions when the oil gets hot, and I'm going to fry these onions in here until they are almost caramelized. We are really trying to get the best of flavors in this stew. We are not skimming on anything. Very little oil. This is about a little under a cup of oil that I actually have here. But by strategizing, we are going to make sure that it comes out very delicious, just as any other stew would have been. We are not going to compromise on taste, aroma, flavor, or texture. Everything is going to be good with this stew. So our onions are for the most part caramelized, and I'm going to add my blended onion, my one onion that is left. I've blended some pepper with that, and I'm going to cook this in the oil. I'm going to rinse out my blender and add that in here and let this cook all the way down again. So that's going to take pretty much about 5 minutes. And whilst that is cooking, I'll go on and blend my roasted vegetables.
Delicious, yeah, delicious, da-da. Delicious, yeah, delicious, da-da-da. Delicious, delicious, da-da. Delicious, yeah, delicious.
The juices at the bottom of my roasting pan, I'm going to save and use that to rinse out my blender.
Yeah. From what she was kitchen, yeah.
So beautifully blended. This is already pretty much cooked. It's almost a sauce at this point. Very well roasted. The aroma is just on point, and pepper and onion in the oil has cooked all the way down like I wanted it to be. And now I'm going to add my tomato paste.
Delicious. 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 Can you smell the aroma?
I'm going to stir this until it is evenly combined with the onions and peppers in the oil, just like about this much, and I'll come in constantly to stir until it's very fried. Yes, I'm actually trying to fry this tomatoes until it becomes all the way dry and dark like it is now, so it is very well cooked before I add my tomatoes and other roasted vegetables. Notice the color difference between the cooked tomato paste and the fresh tomatoes and other vegetables that I've poured in here. That should tell you that what it came to me is very well cooked. Yeah, so the tomato paste and the peppers that were in the pot, very, very well cooked, very dark. I've rinsed out the blender with the juice that I had sitting from the roasting pan. And now I'm just going to stir to make sure this is all combined and just let it simmer down. Our goat meat has been baking or oven frying for about 30 minutes. It is time for me to flip them. Notice how the parts that were touching the baking sheet look so good. Look at that. It is almost like it is fried, but of course it's not deep fried in anything. Literally no oil, just what I sprayed on the pan. I put it back in there for another 20 minutes and look at this. All done, ready to go in our stew when it's time for it to get in there. Now back to our stew to check on it. Making your typical Ghanaian tomato sauce with very little oil requires a lot of patience. You need to be patient, come in and stir as often as possible and allow this to cook all the way down. Ideally, we would be using a lot of oil. I would say normally, not ideally, but normally, and that helps you to get your stew done quicker. It helps everything to fry up quick. But this is working. As you see, we have a little bit of oil coming to the surface. The color of our stew is changing, it's getting darker. So it's pretty much getting there. And at this point, I'm just going to add some dried rosemary in here as well. You can use fresh if that's what you want, or completely omit it. But I like rosemary in my tomato stew, so I'm going to definitely add that in here. The stew has been cooking for approximately an hour. Yes, it takes that long because it has way little oil, so it's not frying up as quickly as if you had a lot of oil. And it's time for me to add my meat at this point. So all my meat is in here now. I'm going to stir it up just so they can get a chance to cook in here for about an extra 20 minutes, soften up a little bit, infuse some flavors in here, and our stew will be done. Of course, I'm not going to let my stock go to waste. That is going to bring a lot more of the goat meat flavor in my stew. So in here it goes. The real flavor and fragrance of your goat meat stew lies in the stock, of course. So please save that. And like I said, if your meat is fatty, just freeze it so you get the fat come to the surface, lift it up, because it's going to be frozen, and then you have your stock on the bottom that you can use in your stew, and that is going to assure you of that perfect crowd pleasing goat meat stew fragrance, flavor, aroma, everything. All the pizzazz will be there. So I rinsed out my pot to add some more water here because my stew is very thick and I need to thin it out a little bit because I have to let it simmer for that 20 minutes where the meat softens up, all the flavors mingle together before our stew is done. I've checked for salt. It is perfectly well seasoned. I always try to put enough salt on my meat so that I don't have to add extra salt to most of the dishes that I make. Of course, every now and then you need to add some more, so test that. If you need to add any seasoning that you prefer, definitely go ahead and add that in here. But this is perfect for me. At this point, I hope your rice is almost cooked though, because still not being no na ye media grow ye ba be di na ye feel it, you know. A punchy stew, papa goat meat stew. Like, yes, this is perfect for your rice, your wachi. This is wachi stew as well. Or this is going to be perfect for your jollof as well. Our stew at this point is done. Time to enjoy.
Delicious. Delicious, yeah, yeah. Delicious, da-da. Delicious, yeah, yeah. Delicious, da-da-da. Delicious, delicious, da-da. Delicious, yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did enjoy or learn something new, kindly give me that thumbs up. It helps to promote my videos. And please share to your friends and family so they get to try it as well. And until I come your way next time with something delicious, be loving, be kind, be happy. And yes, I used the leftover stew to make some jollof. Just look at the color. So on point. You gotta try this.